Hey, Grace Harbor family. Today we are in 1 Samuel 21 through 24, and so we're jumping right into David on the run. Saul's already tried to kill him, and Jonathan warned him, so he's on the run, and one of the first things he addresses is that his men are hungry. So he goes and eats the bread of the presence from Ahimelech, the priest, and his sons, which isn't supposed to happen, but desperate times, right? And I think God makes allowances for that because Jesus refers to this whenever he heals a man on the Sabbath, and he goes, well, did David not eat the bread of the presence? Then he gets to the cave, and David gets to his new place of hiding. Then Saul comes in, and he hears about this from Doeg the Edomite, which I think it's important to remember him being an Edomite specifically, because he gets there and he sees the priests have betrayed him, or as he views as betrayal, even though they were just doing their job and tending to the people, which happened to be David's men that he viewed as a traitor. And so Saul tells his men, kill all the priests, and none of them would because they're men of God doing their duty. But then he tells Doeg, the Edomite, who will remember the Edomites are the offspring of Esau, the ones who gave up their birthright, and in favor of Jacob, who became Israel, and his 12 sons. So Doeg the Edomite likely already has a chip on his shoulder for serving Israel. Would it bring him great joy to go ahead and kill, 85? Anyway, loads of priests. He kills loads of priests. The few survivors, the sons of the main priest, go and stay with David, and they're loyal to him now. Then, David's doing well on his own, staying out of sight, not out of Saul's mind by any stretch of the imagination. And then chapter 23, David hears of the Philistines coming up against the city Keilah. And so he inquires of the Lord, kind of like Gideon, multiple times. He's like, you sure about this? This is kind of, his own men are like, I don't know about this. Before he listens to the Lord and goes and delivers the city out of their hand with his many, many men, saving the city. Then he finds out from the Lord, he finds out that Saul's on his way, finds out that the people would deliver him to Saul. So he goes ahead and leaves, and then when Saul hears he's not in the city anymore, he just kind of gives up that line of thinking that he's going to get David. David does what David does well. He runs and finds a safe place for him and his men. Who finds him but Jonathan, Saul's own son? And, Jonathan kind of renews the covenant with David and says, I know you're going to be king, and I want to be with you. I think this is good. And then we get to one of the most famous acts of King David, aside from maybe Goliath. I'd say this is probably number 2 on the list of Saul coming in, and as the King James Version says, he came in to the cave to cover his feet. So let's do some background on this. Caves are decidedly in the Jewish culture a place that are not clean. They're dirty. That's why they bury in caves unclean bodies that you're not allowed to touch. That's why they cover their feet in caves, because it's already unclean. The culture has a very strong sense of what is clean and unclean. And you'll see this all throughout the Old Testament of the Jews viewing themselves as clean and the rest not. And that continues on into the New Testament, where they view their own national identity as Jews, as people that God has chosen, above all of the Gentiles surrounding them. And part of why Jesus was such a wrench in their thoughts, because Messiah is supposed to, stand with us and elevate us, not stand as our servant. And so everything was just kind of flipped on its head. But aside from that, David goes, and while Saul is covering his feet, he cuts off the corner of his robe and he forbids his men from hurting Saul. Saul, gets up, leaves, and he's kind of on his way out, and David calls after him, "Hey, I'm righteous before the Lord. I could have taken you. Definitely. Nobody would have been able to stop me. And here's the corner of your robe, just as proof." Saul's kind of beside himself. He weeps, then leaves the area. And David's with his men, and Saul's no longer pursuing him. David does not, however, immediately come back into the cities with Saul. I think that's wise. Just because someone's not pursuing you doesn't mean that they're not going to look for opportunity. And so all throughout this, we see that David has been righteous. He's followed God. He's trusted his friend Jonathan. And though he's taken the bread of the presence, which was in Leviticus, it was forbidden. No one's supposed to take it but the priests. There seems to be allowances, especially in how Jesus puts it in the New Testament, where did not David take the bread of the presence, and yet I heal a man on the Sabbath. So it's really interesting to see that David is called man after God's own heart, and he does things righteously. He does things for the right reasons. He doesn't always follow, I guess I would say, the letter of the law because of the bread of the presence thing, but he fed his men, and that's good. He took care of his people. And I think we'll see continually with David that he takes care of his people up until temptation enters the scene, and then he lays that aside for his own personal gain and pride, as we all do sometimes. But David's life is such an interesting view for what we as Christians should strive to be, but also warned not to fall into. Anyway, thanks, Grace Harbor family.